how to promote your research paper. I'm going to start with a quick caveat, because there are many ways you can promote your research paper. Where public affairs expertise comes in is in sharing your research paper with media, with the public, with potential donors, not so much in the academic community. So there's plenty of ways that you can actually share amongst your colleagues. There are all these websites and places you can go to share within your field. That's not really my expertise, so I'm going to kind of target today again to sharing it externally. And in the tips and resources sheet that I will provide after the talk, I'm going to list some of those websites and other places that you can go within the academic community, and so we'll stick with that for today. So heading to the next slide, we've got another cartoon from the Upturned Microscope. This is Nick Papagiorgio, a former cell biologist turned science communicator and cartoonist. And I just want you to take a moment and read this through for some fun. Haha. So the joke, of course, being that they, we all have the best intentions, but there are so many research papers out there that it's truly impossible to read everything. Even though you may download it, you may not get around to it. And why is that? Heading to the next slide. That's because it is research paper palooza out there. There are 2.5 million, more than 2.5 million scientific papers published globally each year. And that is up from 1.7 million just 10 years ago. So there's like a proliferation of research papers happening. There are currently more than 30,000 active scholarly peer-reviewed English language scientific journals out there. And this last stat just really interested me, and I think it's kind of relevant to what's happening right now in the world with COVID, is that there were 23,000 COVID-19 papers published since January. That number is actually doubling every 20 days. So right now there's like a huge emphasis on COVID research, as you know, but that stat kind of stood out to me right now. So the next slide, I just want to talk about the fact that there seems to be a sea change, or kind of a tipping point in the academic world when it comes to research right now. So it's always been publish or perish, but now it's really all about sharing and connecting. And there seems to be less emphasis on publishing and more again on sharing and connecting with the wider world. So taking the research that you're doing and sharing it with the public and sharing it with people outside of your scientific circles. And I think it's a really great thing. So on the next slide, you'll see that there's a great quote that I saw in this research paper that I was going through. Researchers can now be divided into two camps: those who see publication of their research as the final step in the process, and those who see it as the first step in sharing their findings with the wider world. So that's the sea change. That's the tipping point that we've been talking about, is that, is it the final step in what you've been working on, or is it really just the jumping off point for you to be able to share and connect with people about the work that you're doing? So next slide, I'm going to tell you about our first pro tip. So pro tips, again, are just these little extra added bits of information, bonuses to what we're presenting about. Don't be afraid to promote your work. There's a lot of humility in science and medicine in terms of telling people about your work. There's a lot of worry about bragging about what you've been working on. Yet you have to balance that with people knowing what you're working on so that you can access funding and grants and all of that. So really my first pro tip is just don't be afraid to promote your work. An example is a paper presented by University of Toronto researchers at last year's CHEST Congress in Thailand. Found that when authors tweeted about their own work, they saw as much as a 3.5-fold increase in tweets about their studies that year from other people compared with authors who didn't tweet about their studies at all. So really just the simple act of putting your work out there in a compelling, easy to understand way is itself a mechanism to help you share it with the world. And just think about it. I mean, just by tweeting about one paper that you've put out, you increase people recognizing and seeing your work overall in a year. So I want to talk next about news releases. This is the next slide, News Releases 101. On screen, you'll see a news release that we put out back in 2018. Drinking coffee may reduce your chances of developing Alzheimer's or Parkinson's. This is an example of a news release that went viral. And why? Because it's got that water cooler aspect to it. This is a study that either you drink coffee or you know somebody who does. Coffee is part of our culture. So this is an example of something that has a lot of relevance to the community. And the truth is that when we think about news releases, because it's the #1 question I get, can you write me a news release? The question is sometimes, I mean, the answer is sometimes, but not always. And news releases are really driven by the science and the relevance of the news to the public. So I think there's a lot of misunderstanding and confusion that people don't really understand what is the purpose of a news release or why you may want one, because everyone just wants one. But really, what is a news release and what is it meant to do? Every year, UHN puts out hundreds of scientific papers, presentations, articles in basic and molecular science, translational research, clinical treatments, but it's impossible logistically to write that many news releases. And it also defeats the purpose of writing the news releases, because if we saturate media with releases every day, they're going to stop paying attention to when we have something truly important that we feel is newsworthy that we want to share. And that's one of the reasons why we have to be selective and we have to be picky when it comes to news releases. So sometimes they can achieve the goal of getting the word out there, but it may, if you put out too many news releases, then media is going to stop paying attention. So we always have to walk that balance. On the next slide, you'll see that there are actually guidelines on news releases through UHN. So on the left, you'll see a corporate intranet. If you go to the corporate intranet, in the top left corner, you'll see something called Public Affairs Tools Kit. If you click on Public Affairs Toolkit, then it'll bring you to this page on the right here. And at the very bottom, sorry, I was going to use my laser pointer, but we're having some technical difficulties. On the bottom left, under news releases, you'll see news release guidelines. And that's where you want to click if you want to get more information about news releases at UHN. For your information, all news releases must be approved in advance by the Executive VP of Science and Research, Dr. Brad Waters. So he's the one who decides ultimately whether or not we are going to write the press release. If he decides yes, then it is written by Public Affairs in consultation with the authors of the paper, and then approved by the authors. And once it's approved by the authors, it's then approved by Dr. Waters and also Jillian Howard, who's the Vice President of Public Affairs and Communications at UHN. And at that point, it's distributed via a few different services that we use. Most often, it's Eureka Alert. We also have used Cision, which is also CNW Group, and Newswise. And we may even send an advanced copy to some select members of the media who we trust. It's really important for the media to have a heads up on big stories because they need to prepare for them. It's hard to turn around a story in a day. So we may, someone that we work with a lot and trust, we may send it to them even a week in advance, probably a few days in advance, so that they can have their story prepared and ready to go. On the next slide, we can talk about some criteria that is used when selecting news releases. So these are some questions. These are not, this is not 100%, but these are some guidelines and some criteria that we use to determine whether something is worthy of a news release at UHN. So is your research representing a breakthrough or a leap forward versus an incremental advance? And what we mean by that is, is your research about a discovery of a new gene or a discovery of a new function of a known gene? Is your research appearing in a high impact journal? Again, this is not the be all or end all, but if your research appears in the New England Journal of Medicine, in JAMA, in Cell or Science or Nature, there's probably more of a likelihood that it's going to be a high impact research that we're going to want to promote to media and elsewhere. Is your research predominantly a UHN-led study? So what does that mean? Is the principal investigator or senior author UHN affiliated, or was the majority of the work done at UHN? Is your research having an immediate clinical impact? And this is important, especially where media is concerned. And is it connected to UHN developed technology? So UHN does not normally issue news releases to announce the launch of studies or research projects or third-party products or launches. The exception is if UHN has an intrinsic involvement in the development of that technology or that project or that product. And if that's the case, then there's going to be more of a likelihood that we may consider. So that's kind of a 101 on news releases to give you an idea of how those decisions are made, because that is something that comes up often in public affairs. The next slide is all about, will your paper interest media? Another pro tip. This is probably the second question I get, how do I pitch my research to media? What are they going to be interested in? We've talked about this in prior coffee break sessions, but I think it's important. Can you answer these 5 questions? How significant is your discovery? Is it explainable and relatable to a general audience? How could your findings impact patient care? Very important. Do you have visuals to share? This is something that is always, not thought of initially, but super important. Especially if you're pitching to television media, do you have footage of this work being done in the lab? Do you have footage of the surgery? Do you have photos that you can share? Microscopy images, scans that have no patient identifying information. So think about these things, because a television reporter especially is much more likely to consider doing a story if there are visuals and that's part of the initial pitch. And is there a patient who's willing to be interviewed? And I'll just reiterate what we've talked about in terms of patient consent, which is that all patients must be consented by public affairs. So the role of a doctor or a researcher is to approach the patient, find out if they're interested, and if they are, connect them with public affairs. We need them to sign a consent form before we can pitch media about their story. So really important that public affairs talks to them, because also they need to know that there's no obligation for them, and that this is something that they can do if they want to and if they're interested, but there's no obligation on their side to be able to talk about their story. So, ultimately, if you find a patient who's willing to talk about the research or talk about the new clinical development, then media is much more likely to be interested. So we're going to talk next about a few tips to help you in promoting your research paper. So on this slide, tip number 1, connect with public affairs. It seems like common sense, but what happens all too often is that Twain and I and our colleagues in public affairs across UHN will find out about these papers after they have been published. And that's a problem, because that's another criteria, is that we will not often issue press releases for papers that have already come out. Now, this is a delicate balancing act again, because sometimes you'll find out from the journal that your paper's been accepted, and then it's published within days. So we understand that sometimes this is out of our control, but sometimes it's not. And so I think the best time to connect with us is as early as possible, once your paper has been accepted, and ideally once you have a final proof or something that you can share with us. At that point, we'll talk to you to get some more information, and it's just so much more helpful for us to have the information in advance to be able to help you understand how best to promote it. So tip number 2, next slide, is write a plain language summary. Now, this is something that is also beneficial for public affairs, because many of us don't have a scientific background, and so we are your true lay audience. Some of us do have a scientific background, but many of us are former journalists, and so we have that perspective. We understand media. We know what is something that might interest people, but we need that plain language summary. And the truth is that the plain language summary can benefit you in many ways. So one of which is that you can really take your abstract, assuming that it's written really well with a hook and using storytelling techniques that you have learned in past coffee break webinars, and use that abstract to broaden out to a plain language summary, talking about what did you find, why is it important, how will it benefit patients, and what is your hook. Maybe your hook is that epilepsy is the most serious neurological condition in the world, or maybe that Alzheimer's is really like a tsunami in terms of the cases and the proliferation globally and what we're looking at in the next 20 to 25 years. So your hook is how to get people interested in what you're talking about, and it all comes down to why you study what you study and why other people should care about what you study. So a plain language summary will really encourage more people to read your paper outside of the scientific community. It could also be in the format of a Q&A, which we often do, as an extra added element that we can send to reporters or writers who are interested in following up about your research, or even a blog post. So I don't know how many of you actually have blogs, but a blog is a great way to be able to share your research. And it's also something you can link to in social media. So I think, just making it conversational and again, answering these questions. What did you find? What were some of the key outcomes? Why is it significant? What could it mean for patients? The other thing you can do with a plain language summary is post it to online discussion groups and forums that, might hit the audiences that you're looking to connect with. The next slide is tip number 3, embrace multimedia. Now this is, this is where Twain and I, this is our sweet spot. We make a lot of videos for Krembil, and it's something that we love to do because we find that it gets great uptake and really can, a lot of engagement and connection with the community, especially on social media. But think about making a video. Now we can't make everybody's video for them, and it's very rare that we would be able to make a video in conjunction with a press release, which we have done. But think about making your own video. Think about having someone in your lab film you on a cell phone answering the questions that I had just put forward to you. What did you find? Why is it significant? And what can it mean for patients? And if you do that, that's something that we can provide also to reporters, or that you could put out on social media, and you may get interest simply from that video. You may want to also upload an audio clip that might be used in a podcast, or might be used to send to podcast producers to entice them to have you on the show. I also put on the right here a photo of Dr. Kapoor in the lab, because I think that's another thing to think about when you talk about multimedia, are candid photos. Twain talked about portraits and photographs last week. Well, candid photos can really tell a story. So in addition to taking some portraits or some great shots of you and your colleagues in the lab or at Krembil, think about taking some candid shots that go with what you're trying to portray. So, again, you need everybody's consent when you have them in photos, but candid shots can tell a story. And so I really think it's important to think about that. When we talk about embracing multimedia, it's great to talk about who is your audience. Is it your colleagues? Is it your greater community? If you're studying epilepsy, is it the people who have epilepsy, their family members and caregivers? Is it the public? Is it donors potentially, or stakeholders? What are they interested in? Where do they work? So think about all of these things before you go to the great effort of embracing multimedia. But it's something that really can help you tell your story, and it can help you share your research. And it's also great practice to get into the habit of providing content that can be used and repurposed. The next slide is post on social media. So again, this is something that we come back to in almost every webinar because it's super important from our perspective in terms of sharing and connecting. You've got 2 tweets here, one from the Reber Lab and one from the Kalia Labs, and great examples of effective, compelling, engaging ways to share your research, whether it's through a dynamic photo and a link to more information, or just a really great plain language explanation of what it is that you do, so that it's not just your scientific colleagues that'll understand what it is that you have discovered, or what your research is what is the significance of your research, but it may be anybody who is connected to the disease area or disorder that you study. Next slide is all about using popular and relevant hashtags. So there are the old faithfuls like academic Twitter, Science Matters. There's Women in Science and Women in STEM. These are always popular hashtags to consider, as well as research and science. So if you've got the room in your tweet, these are often things that you'll want to hit if it makes sense for the content. But then there's also sort of the moment hashtags and more disease area or disorder area specific. So for example, End Alzheimer's is very popular, especially around health promotion days. Purple Day for epilepsy, movement disorder for Parkinson's, and chronic pain is always a very popular hashtag. So it's kind of fun to explore around before you actually put it out on social media, on Twitter, Instagram, or LinkedIn, and see what some of the more popular hashtags are. I threw in Monday Motivation because I think those are, every day has a hashtag. They have a few hashtags, Monday Motivation, Monday Vibes, Monday Thoughts. And so I will often go in and just kind of explore around, see which one might be trending on the day that I want to put it out on social media, and I'll connect it with that. Now, oftentimes you're not going to have room for hashtags, but if you do, then it's great to include them, especially on Instagram as well. The next slide, tip number 5, update your professional profile. And there's many benefits to doing something like this. So here you see Aki Nakamura, who works in our arthritis program, and this is reprinted with his permission. I love this profile, this LinkedIn professional profile. I love that he's got sort of a sketch there as well that tells a little bit more about his research. I love that he's got a professional photo. I really like that it's black and white. But the benefit of updating your professional profile is manyfold. So, you know, people use LinkedIn mostly in research and science. LinkedIn is very popular. So the beauty of updating your professional profile is that you can tailor it more easily than an academic profile page, which often follows a standard format. And what's more, your online profile will go with you if you were to change jobs or institutions, whereas academic profiles get outdated. And so it's important to update it. The other beauty of updating your professional profile is that you can include links to other sites or projects or work that you've done. You can include links to blogs or websites or your Twitter profile or a conference that you recently spoke at. So there's algorithms that match you to people with similar interests, and that could lead to a collaboration or other opportunities. So I think it's really important actually to update your professional profile, and just gives you that opportunity and that ability to be in the moment and to be relevant in your world. The next slide is our last pro tip, and that's about trying community outreach. Now, this is something that you may already be doing, and if not, it's something that I highly encourage you to do. Here's an example of Mary Pat McAndrews for Krembil and UHN, and you know, this is something that she does often, is speaking to the community. And I think it's, you know, you really want to, if you study epilepsy, you study Parkinson's, or if you study Alzheimer's, you want to be connected to that community, to the people who have it, to their family members, to their caregivers, to other experts and researchers in the field for collaboration opportunities. And this is a really great way to do it. So in addition to all of these other techniques, call up Epilepsy Toronto or Epilepsy, you know, these community organizations that you are probably already connected to, and ask them about opportunities to be able to share your latest research. And I think you'll be really surprised and excited about where those opportunities can go. So the next slide, we're just going to recap that you can better promote your research paper by connecting with public affairs, writing a plain language summary, posting on social media, updating your professional profile, and by doing community outreach. And these, again, are just a few of the ways that you can help promote your work externally. Again, this session is really targeting media and the public, as opposed to other research connection opportunities, which maybe you all can help me with, because you probably know better than I do what's available out there to be able to share your research within your community. And just before we go, I'll just mention that, you know, there are other internal UHN opportunities as well. So whether there's a news release to be written, there's also UHN News, which runs like a newspaper. So we have an editor and we pitch stories to him, and you know, he decides whether it's something that we will cover as a story, or whether maybe it's something that might go in UHN on the go. When it comes to achievements and milestones, there's something called the honor roll that you're probably familiar with. That's a great opportunity to be able to highlight and give people props, you know, in that venue. There's newsletters that are site-based or program-based, and that's another opportunity in which your research could be profiled. And of course, there's social media, and we're always looking for content for Krembil especially to be able to promote, and we're happy to help you promote it on social media. And, you know, again, you may be surprised by connecting or by tagging stakeholders or tagging other people who may pick up on it and who you may hear from and what connections may be made. So lastly, last slide, happy to answer your questions as always. I hope you've enjoyed this session today. I know there's a lot more that I did not cover in this topic. The more that I got into it, the more surprised I was at just how huge it was. And so today is really just meant to give you, again, just a little bit of bite-sized information to help guide you next time you've got a paper that you want to promote, so you have a better understanding of how it works with news releases, or how it works with internal promotion. What is the role of public affairs? What is your role, and how we can all work together. Ultimately, our goal is to help you promote your research and your work. And we love to help you do that. That's also, you know, really the benefit of these sessions, is to give you that sort of foundation to build on in terms of information. So thank you very much for watching, and let me know if you have any questions.
Thank you, Heather. So apologies to everybody. We did have a bit of a glitch, a technical glitch today. So that has been resolved now that we're no longer sharing screens. I don't see any questions in the chat box yet. Perhaps we will give everybody a couple of minutes to get their thoughts together and have some time to type in their questions. I do have a question on my end. So we put out the, so, you know, Heather, you talked about a lot of the promotions, you know, I guess the external promotions, press releases, and social media. I know that at Krembil, we put out newsletters, and there are stories that are put out as part of that. And so how do we, like if a researcher wants their paper promoted as part of the Krembil newsletter, how can we get that, or how can they, you know, kind of get a spot on the newsletter? What is the process, and what can we do? That's because that's another great avenue for promoting internally. We actually have internal as well as external audiences for that Krembil newsletter. Can you speak to that, Heather?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. It is a great opportunity in the Krembil newsletter to be able to share your research. And again, it comes down, it's sort of the same situation as news releases, is that we simply cannot cover everyone's research. There's just too much. So in every newsletter, we, you know, also we want to hit each pillar, and we want to talk about arthritis, vision, and neuro, and brain. And so it cuts down even further. So what is the process? If you want to have your paper highlighted in the newsletter, then let's say you would contact me. I would connect with my counterpart in research, UHN research, and we have that conversation. You know, which papers should we feature in this newsletter? Can, you know, if we can't do it this month, could we do it in a couple of months down the road? Are we being representative of the entire program? So are we featuring, you know, each pillar? Are we featuring, you know, maybe there's someone who's been featured a couple of months ago and now has another paper, but since we've just featured them, we may not cover it. So all of these are decisions that go into deciding what goes into the newsletter. And, you know, I think that the number one step is to just make sure we know about your paper, because again, going back to that second slide, there are thousands of new papers that come out all the time. And don't assume that we're reading, you know, all of those journals and that we are completely on top of all the papers coming out. We're kind of counting on you as well to keep us posted on what's coming out, ideally as soon as possible. So step number one, as soon as your paper gets accepted, let public affairs know, and we'll take it from there. We can help you understand what is the best way to promote. And, you know, maybe that's the point at which I go to UHN Research, my counterpart, and say, you know, what do you think about featuring this in the newsletter? Or that's the point at which I have a conversation with Jill Howard, the VP of Public Affairs and Communication, and I say, you know, I think this is really worth a news release. What do you think? So everything is conversation based. These are all guidelines. Nothing is 100%. And, you know, I think the most important thing I can say to you is to advocate for yourself. If you think your research is, you know, is worthy of external promotion, and there are times when that's not possible. But if you think it is, then if it can't be through UHN, then maybe there are other ways through social media or blogs or some of these other ways that we've talked about getting your own research out.
Okay, that's great, Heather. So we have a couple of questions from Supriya. The first question she has is, can you give some examples of community promotions?
Community promotions. I am assuming, Supriya, maybe you mean stories that have been picked up by media. I don't know if that's what you mean by that.
Yes, she's confirmed. Okay. Yes.
Yeah. So that news release that I showed you earlier, the coffee one, is a great example, because you know, it didn't get pickup initially locally. It was something that we found out about after the fact. And this was an exception in which we did put out a news release, you know, a couple days late, which we don't often do. And it was like a slow tsunami, I call it. Like, even to this day, I still get requests. And Carly's smiling right now because it's crazy. Like, I'll still get a request about the story that's a year and a half old. is the story water cooler ish, which means, you know, are people talking about it at the water cooler? If it's about coffee, probably. Like this one was a bit of a no-brainer in that it's something that everybody can relate to and it's connected to research, and how often does that happen? So that's a great example. Another example that I'll give you is a story from about a month ago from our epilepsy researchers about a connection between listening to Mozart and a reduction in seizure frequency. So, you know, this has the popular sort of water cooler aspect of it being connected to Mozart, which people are really interested in. It is about, you know, potential treatment, adjuvant treatment for epilepsy in addition to other therapies. And so it had all of those elements of, you know, what is your research? Why is it significant? Because it can be added on to other therapies that are currently in action to help reduce seizure frequency. If you help reduce seizure frequency in people with epilepsy, you can change their lives. So it had all of those elements. We had a patient. I found out about this in advance, and we had a patient who was willing to be interviewed, and he was wonderful and accessible. You know, we had the music. So this involved the audio clip of the actual Mozart sonata, and then the audio clip of the one that was shuffled, essentially. So people could hear the difference in what these patients were listening to. So again, another example of relatable to people, driven by the science, had a patient, had some visuals to share, and it had all of those elements. And I think that that's why stories like that get picked up in the media. There's other times where I'll get a call from a CTV reporter about a study which happened recently with Dr. Valerie Wallace, and a study that came out about glioblastoma. And I was actually shocked because it's very, very infrequent that I'll get a call from media about something that I did not pitch that's related to research. So that was a great opportunity. You know, we immediately thought, okay, what can we show her? Do you have any images that we can share? Is there a patient? You know, in this case, that wasn't relevant because it was very research-based. So, you know, that's what when we're thinking about pitching media, that's what we think about. And if we get a request from media, that's immediately where my mind goes. Do we have a patient? Do we have visuals? What can we provide? You know, is the researcher available? And then we have a little bit of a media training where we talk about key points and what to stick to and how to get your messaging out and that sort of thing. So I hope that answers your question, Supriya.
I think so. That was very. The second question that Supriya has is, how does one look for relevant hashtags? Do you have any quick tips?
Yeah, I mean, I can speak to Twitter, and maybe Twain can speak to Instagram. He's more familiar with Instagram. You know, on Twitter, I've kind of made a list for myself of the ones that are trending often. So for me, if I'm tweeting on behalf of Krembil, you know, I will use the Monday motivation, Tuesday thoughts, you know, Wednesday wisdom, and that sort of thing. I'll also take a look at what's trending. So when you go on Twitter, and if I could share my screen right now, I would, but I'm having some technical difficulties. But if you go on Twitter on the right-hand side, you'll see what's trending, and, you know, start there. The other thing I'll do sometimes is I'll literally just hashtag Alzheimer or Alzheimer's, and I'll see the tweets that come up and see what other hashtags you know, people are using with Alzheimer's. So for example, that's how I heard about End Alz. I didn't know about that hashtag. And then once I saw it and I clicked on it, I was like, huh, all these, you know, organizations that fund Alzheimer's research are using this End Alz hashtag. Okay, so, you know, I may include that if it's relevant. So you have to explore. You can Google, but that's not going to help you because Twitter is so to the minute and to the moment that it's just better to go on and explore whatever disease area you're interested in, see what people are tweeting about. And then also the other part of it is health promotion days. So if it's World Brain Day or, you know, World Parkinson's or Lupus Day, there's often a hashtag associated with that. So go on and Google and know when those dates are coming up and what the hashtags are, because they're always connected to, you know, an umbrella organization, like the International Federation of Neurology or something like that has World Brain Day. So you'll find out what's coming up. Oh, there you go. Thank you. So on the right, I know, oh yeah, here. So you can see the trends in the middle. It'll say, Canada trends. There's some things that are not relevant, but if you go and search Twitter and put in, for example, hashtag end alz, ENDALZ. Yep. And click. Then, and if you scroll down, you'll see who's posting. The Alzheimer's Association, different patients, and you'll get an idea. So here you've got like walk to end alz. I mean, that's something that's specific to a city, but it'll give you an example of what other people are tweeting about. Another one is Purple Day in March for epilepsy. I mean, that's huge on social media. So when you hashtag Purple Day, you'll see what people, it's celebrities, and everybody seems to be tweeting about it. And it's a little more timely in March, but you can see here, like it's pretty popular. So it just gives you an example of, it's not only its patients, its organizations, it's other researchers who study it. Gives you a really good sense of of other hashtags as well, like epilepsy. So, the disease area hashtags are huge. So epilepsy, arthritis has a lot of tags. Brain, the word brain has a lot of tags. So it's going to take you some time. The other thing is you won't have room for all these hashtags all the time because tweets are not big. So by the time you craft your tweet, if you get one hashtag in there, you're pretty lucky. But that's why you got to make it count.
Yeah, so in terms of Instagram, it's similar. So I keep a list too. As Heather said, looking up sort of the disease areas, that also works. The nice thing about Instagram is that you can follow hashtags. So say you've got your researcher in a specific disease area, you can follow a bunch of hashtags that can be related to that disease area, see who's posting, and then also connect with people that are also posting in that disease area and build those social media relationships that way as well. So it's pretty much similar for Instagram as well. And with Instagram, the nice thing is that I think there's a 500 character limit on the caption. So you've got a little more room to play with in terms of the amount of hashtags. The key and the sweet spot I've found for Instagram is anywhere between 12 to 15. More than that, Instagram will kind of flag it as spam. So, and your post would get what we call shadow banned, meaning that you'll be able to see it, your followers might be able to see it, but those hashtags that they would get filtered into, those people won't be able to see it. So make sure it's relevant and it's concise and you aren't overusing the hashtag so that, doesn't get spammed, at least from an Instagram perspective. I'm not sure if it's the same on Twitter or not, but I imagine it might be.
Yeah, that's really interesting. I did not know that. In Instagram, I usually see a whole bunch of hashtags that are several lines below. And so I guess that's one of the ways that people will add in hashtags.
Yeah, so that's common. So people will put it in the comments. I know, I'm not sure if it was like 6 months ago, there were updates that said that it was not going to be relevant if you put it as the first comment. So it's better to put it in the caption versus the comment, and then don't edit your caption of your photo within an hour, because it kind of, Instagram reads it as it's you're altering your post and its authenticity. So you want to leave it at least for an hour. I know that the best thing is to proofread everything before you hit post, so you don't have to go in and edit. And that way you won't get sort of the shadow ban, or your post won't kind of fall to the bottom of the pile in terms of how the algorithm works.
Another great tip. So Amanda has a question. So first, she wants to thank Heather for offering these tips. She wants to know whether your tips only apply to a research paper. Often it can take years to compile research into a publication. When and where are there other opportunities to promote your ongoing work without divulging too much?
Great idea. And actually, Amanda is a master at this. She should be answering her own question. That's a really good point. So there's many milestones on the way to a research paper. And it could be that, you work late into the night with some colleagues and you get a great result on the synthesis of a molecule and you're pretty excited about it. So if you're not sure, you can always certainly run it by public affairs, and probably should, because you don't want to give away too much. But I think those are the opportunities, the late night tweets, you and a colleague showing that, this is what you do. You're there till 2 a.m. because that's what the research calls for. The other thing too is you may present the abstract or something at a conference. before a paper is published. So that's another opportunity to be able to share details. In terms of not divulging too much, I mean, that's something to talk to your PI about, probably, to ensure that what you're talking about is something that you can be. But I do think that there's a lot of opportunities, mostly social media connected, possibly blog connected, which is, you know, easier to vet, about the path or the road to publishing. Because you're right, it can take years. And, you know, you may publish in a journal that you know, may not get the kind of highlight or promotion that you want to. And so you should be able to promote your work in advance. In addition, there are sites that I mentioned in the beginning. I'm not experts in these sites, but I will provide the links. You know, there's sites like ResearchGate and Google Scholar and, you know, other options that are within the scientific community, places where you can mostly post your published paper. But that's something that, you know, another opportunity for you essentially to share your work. So I hope that helps.
Yeah, that's a good point too. I just wanted to add from an Instagram perspective, use your Instagram stories, show the behind the scenes, you know, as Heather alluded to. That stuff really does well on Instagram stories. And you know what, with Instagram, you can highlight that, right? And you can show your progress for your research project, and people can come to your page and look at, you know, where you started and where you've come through and all the sort of small victories or big victories in between when you started and when you finally publish your data.
Okay, thank you from Amanda. So Karen has a couple of questions. The first one is, do reporters come to you, Heather, to do more in-depth interviews after seeing you tweet about a paper release?
Great question. So I have, yes, many of them follow us. Many of the television reporters follow Krembil. Everybody follows UHN. So imagine that if UHN is tweeting or retweeting, then pretty much every health reporter in the city is going to see it. I follow all the health reporters and writers, so you know, many of them do follow us back. I also have relationships with a lot of these people just from my time working in media. So I will often just send a quick note to someone saying, you know, we've got this, if it's under embargo and with the permission of the author, we've got a paper coming out next week or in a couple of days about this. This is what we have a patient who's willing to be interviewed, and the researcher is available if you're interested. Oftentimes, very infrequently will they come to me, I have to be honest. Like usually I'm going to them, and the ratio is probably about 50-50. And the other thing too is there's no rhyme or reason. You know, oftentimes, like even with the coffee story that I mentioned earlier, I was shocked that we didn't get more local pickup. And I still to this day don't really have an answer other than, you know, maybe they feel that they missed the boat because the study had already come out. But internationally, you know, as I said, I'm still getting requests about this study. So I think it's there's no rhyme or reason. It depends on the news day and what other news is happening. It depends on the interest and water cooler-ness of the story and whether it's something that they're going to go home and talk to their families about because they thought was really interesting. It depends on the visuals. And, you know, again, Twain and I have relationships with a lot of the media that comes to cover these stories, and most everyone in public affairs at UHN does. So, you know, oftentimes we're at the point where if they can do it, they will, because, you know, they trust us and we trust them. And if we're pitching it, they know that it's probably a good story. Now, on the flip side, media training is a really important part of this too, because you were talking about in-depth, Karen. I mean, I've done a lot of media with Karen because her work is very water cooler, and you know, chronic pain is something that affects everyone or someone that they love or someone that they know. And, you know, we've had half-hour podcast radio interviews, and we've had minute-and-a-half TV interviews. And I'd be curious, you know, to talk about Karen's experience, but I think you learn from each one because you don't want to be disappointed by the output of what's important to leave in and what's important not to. If you're talking to a CBC reporter who's a general assignment reporter, who's covering one thing one day and one thing another day and isn't specifically a health reporter or producer, then you've got to really pare down the information that you're giving, because they're going to be coming and interviewing you at 2 o'clock in the afternoon and the story's going to be on 4 hours later. So it's all a learning experience. I think overall, you know, we try to keep good relationships with the media, and we want them to cover the stories that we want them to cover. So that's another reason why we don't saturate them with too many news releases and also too many pitches. We're pretty selective.
Okay. Karen's second question is there a close relationship between what you work on and the foundation and the information that gets passed along to potential donors?
Another good question. We do work very closely with the foundation on many projects, and I think we're now working more closely than ever. We have regular meetings to talk about content, and Twain and I are in regular touch with the content marketing person at the foundation. So I think we're getting more into that mindset of sharing, and I think you can never assume. So if there's something that you're doing with the foundation, an interview or something like that, and you want to make sure that we know about it, tell us and we'll connect with them. But I think that we are getting more into that mindset of sharing our content to be able to repurpose that content so that nothing is siloed, because it benefits everyone.
So Carly has added a comment, and I'll just read it out to everybody in case you don't have access. So along with the relationships that Heather has mentioned, sometimes a second or third story can be pitched following the completion of a media interview, depending on what is happening in the Institute. This has happened on occasion where a reporter might ask, so what else is happening here?
Yes, thank you, Carly. Great point. There's two parts to this. One is when a reporter comes to do a story, I'm usually giving them some Krembil magazines as a little loot bag on their way out. So, they may come and do a story about epilepsy, but I'm also giving them the arthritis magazine and, the neuro and vision magazines. Because each of those stories has usually a patient that's been consented, and they're great stories, and they're they're what we call evergreen stories. They don't necessarily become outdated. So that happens a lot. Or depending on the reporter, like Pauline Chan from CTV, she will often say, so what else do you have going on? Or CBC health producer comes and says, what else are you working on? And that's, I think the most important thing to realize and to remember is everyone thinks it's so difficult to get media, and it really can be. But the truth is, you have to think of it as they are content factories. Television shows, radio shows, newspapers, they need stories and they need content. They only want the good stuff, and they're not going to print or broadcast anything that they don't feel is worthy, but they're constantly on the hunt for good stories. So I try to think of it like that instead of, worrying about how difficult it is to get through. And, I've had people who are very good friends of mine who are in senior positions of, assignment desk and things like that at some of the broadcasters say, no, it's all business. So when you pitch something, sometimes there's just, again, there's no rhyme or reason. And occasionally, they'll come back and want more information, or they'll want to know what other elements we can provide. But there's always opportunity to be able to pitch other things that are going on, especially when you have them in your grasp.
Thank you very much, Heather. I think that concludes all of the questions that we have in the chat box. I know Twain is ready with our mug draw for today. And during this time, while we pull out the name, if you have any questions, take the last couple of moments just to type it out in the group chat. And over to you, Twain.
All right, so I've got all the names here in this makeshift cover. It's actually a cover for one of my photography lights. I couldn't find anything in the rush that I had to get this ready in. But so just shake this up here, and I will pull out a name here. There we go. And that is, can everyone see that? Renata
Mancopus.
Yes, perfect. Congratulations on winning your Krembil mug.
Yay! That's awesome.
I'm sorry, I know I don't have a young child, Karen. I saw the comment on the chat. I'm not married yet and don't have kids, so.
So Karen says she misses my daughter doing the draw. She actually did a new hairstyle today in preparation for the draw. Okay, I'm going to bring her in.
Come on, Ellie, let's see it.
But due to the technical glitches, I had to take over the slide sharing this morning, and so we asked Twain to do the draw. Okay, say hello to everybody.
Oh, wow. I had that hairstyle yesterday. Very cute.
Ellie.
Hello. Well, that concludes all of the questions for today. I'm going to hand it over to Heather just for a couple of words, but maybe next week's session.
Sure. Just as always, want to thank everybody for being here today and for coming out to these Krembil coffee break sessions. We really love doing them for you, and we're really happy to share what we know about science communication and help, in these small ways. So love your participation, love the interaction. If you have any feedback or have any questions after the fact, you know where to find us. Next week, I will be talking about the art of the media interview. And then the following week, Twain is going to be covering scientific hacks, design hacks for your scientific presentation. So thank you very much. Have a safe and happy weekend, and we'll see you next Friday.